Hello, everybody. My name is Bruce Montgomery, and this is my colleague, Tracy Priest.
Hello, everybody.
And we're with The Road to Retail. On our podcast, Tracy and I hope to offer tips, insights, ideas, and examples for how small, emerging, and challenger CPG, consumer packaged goods, brands can build their business. Everything from determining if you're ready to grow, where to start, how to prove it online, how to go about securing distribution at a national retailer, driving your business with the end consumer, and how to go about finding an investor if that's important to you. The bottom line is, we would love to help you be successful by highlighting the many important factors that go into establishing and growing your brand.
Bruce and I have been working in CPG commercial operations for over 30 years, working on brands of all sizes. By commercial operations, we mean sales, marketing, trade marketing, new product development, broker and distributor management, new product development, brand M&A, and financing. As a part of our show, we bring our guests that are brand founders and leaders, agencies, Amazon specialists, sales agents, contract manufacturers, retailers, and investors to discuss their experiences and share their insights with the audience.
To keep up with the show, please subscribe to the Road to Retail podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Leave us a review and consider sharing the show with a friend or colleague that may benefit from the content. You can also check out our website to learn more at www.road2retail.com and follow The Road to Retail on LinkedIn. We would love to have you along for the ride. Today's show is sponsored by Retail and Response. You've heard it a million times on this podcast. It's not about getting your product on the retail shelf. It's about moving product off the shelf and hitting the retailer's sales velocity hurdles fast. Otherwise, they're going to begin the discontinuation process. Trust me. A slow sales start can be fatal to your brand. You need consumers coming in seeking your brand. You know, the one they heard about on radio or saw on TV. If you think radio or TV advertising is too expensive, you need to speak with our friends at Retail and Response. With over 30 years helping drive hundreds of millions of dollars of sales for their clients, Retail and Response can get your brand on radio and TV for pennies on the dollar. Check them out at retailandresponse.com. That's retailandresponse.com. Okay.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Road to Retail. Bruce, great to see you.
Tracy, great to see you too. I feel like I've seen you a lot lately.
That's exactly right. We have spent a lot of time together this week. But anyway, before we get started with our guest today, please tell us about our newest sponsor.
Great. Thank you so much. So we'd like to welcome Pathfinders Advertising to our list of sponsors. So let me tell you about them. When considering an agency partner, we'd love for you to consider Pathfinders Advertising. For over 45 years, they've been helping CPG brands with business building multi-channel campaigns for emerging brands and beyond. They're a diverse group of integrated marketing subject matter experts committed to helping you get the most out of your marketing dollars and efforts. From package design to digital marketing to driving your social media efforts, they're always trying to do things the smart way the first time. And most importantly, they have your back if and when something unexpected arises. We're committed, down-to-earth, principled. They work hard for you when you partner with them. They'll show you how to stay ready to rise to every occasion. There's nothing they can say that will convince you to work with them. All they can do is show you when you give them a chance. Pathfinders Advertising. Ring them up. Vicki Holland, Head of Business Development. She is dynamite. Tracy, let me tell you about our guest today.
Absolutely.
Today, we are very, very fortunate to be joined by Miss Roberta Townes. Roberta is a senior category merchant with GNC. Roberta, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for your time this morning.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So before we dive in, why don't you give the group a little background on what you've done in your career and how you've gotten to the chair you're currently in?
Yeah. So as you said, I'm currently the senior category merchant at GNC for specific categories of food and drink. So food and drink, like think about energy drinks, high protein bars, kind of better for you snacks, and then wellness. And then within wellness, more condition specific. So, helping support like sleep, your heart, brain, energy. So those categories. So I've been there a little over 8 years. Prior to that, a whole nother category in footwear. So I was at Kmart, for people that remember Kmart. I was there for a little over 9 years as a footwear buyer for women. So a big difference in categories, but of course, from a buyer perspective, it's the same type of strategy.
That's terrific. That's terrific. You guys have such an interesting, I'm not even going to talk about the website, but the stores that you guys have are always so interesting to go in there and see what's happening, because you guys are clearly a leader in VMS, where you spend a lot of time there. Tracy.
Absolutely. So let's dive in here a little bit. So, Roberta, tell us a little about the role emerging brands play in your GNC strategy.
Yeah. I mean, emerging brands are definitely important for us. They drive, freshness, they drive innovation. They help in bringing some competition into space. So, when they're coming in and they're sitting next to legacy brands, in some cases, it makes them push harder to make sure that they're still driving performance in their space. I'd also say it's important because they bring in new consumers. So that's, of course, is a big part of what we look for when it comes to bringing brands into stores. Is like, how is this brand going to be incremental to the category? So, it's them utilizing their consumer base to really drive new traffic, new consumers, and of course, sales. Because we're not looking for brands to just cannibalize on shelf, but the goal of an emerging brand is that it's incremental to the space that it sits.
That's
Yeah.
all.
So folks, Tracy and I often talk about some of the points Roberta just made. And since she's a senior category manager, it means much more coming from her. She talked about points of difference. She talked about being incremental to her category. Roberta, please correct me, but it is not a good use of her time if she's going to go through all the hoops of cutting in a new brand and it doesn't increase her performance. Because Roberta, I really want you to correct me here, but Roberta cares way more about her category performance than your individual brand performance. You're either
Yep.
helping her or you're hurting her.
Yep. You're
Okay.
correct, right? We're not trying to add incremental units, the dollars, all of those things, cost factors, just for it to take sales of something else that sits on shelf.
So this next question, I think, will be super interesting to the brand leaders out there. What does a winning emerging brand pitch look like or contain when you're kind enough to grant them a Zoom or an in-person meeting, if you guys are back to that? What are you really looking for? And I'm going to give one spoiler alert, and hopefully you'll agree. Tracy and I talk all the time. It's like, hey, looks like Roberta, they don't want an 80-page deck.
Correct. Yeah.
Floor is yours. What are you
Yeah.
looking for?
No, definitely. I mean, first of all, the time allotted isn't going to be even enough to go through an 80-page deck. So you want to make sure that you're concise in the information that you're, providing, right? So before even going into like what specifically we're looking for in a pitch, I would say for me personally as a buyer, and a lot of buyers, I could say, is that you want to make sure you have some sort of pitch deck. And it doesn't have to be something that you are walking through every single line, every single page, right? Because we want to make sure we're having, this like more natural dialogue, but it just helps in guiding. And then secondly, the fact that buyers are visual people, right? So, for me, I don't want to come on, that initial conversation and it's just us going back and forth. And I don't see anything that's really tangible that's connected to your brand. So just making sure that you actually have some sort of deck, just, could be small from a page perspective, but something. And then that you're just providing some samples, whether, I prefer to have them early so that, we have ability to kind of review them, sample them before the actual pitch. So those two things I just want to call out are important to have before you even get into like the real key conversation points.
So over the course of your career, Roberta, what counsel would you give these emerging brand leaders? How do they even go about getting an appointment with you? Is it recommendations? Is it someone you meet at a trade show?
Yeah,
Is it an email that catches your eye? What's
yeah,
like the magic formula?
yeah. So I would say definitely trade shows are important. So we do attend those. Just we actually just came back from Expo West. So
Yep.
those are great places for you to get in front of retail buyers and be able to pitch your story and your brand. I would say other ways are, opportunities through LinkedIn. So some merchants are pretty active there and go to see, emails that are sent and have conversation or early conversation starts there. And then many times we'll get like a reference from somebody else, like, hey, this person gave me your contact and I wanted to reach out to see if you're interested. So those are the modes. And then I would probably say one of the last ones are just about like a brand being visible on social. So a lot of times, one of the ways in which merchants look for brands is by searching social media, like what's important, what are people like speaking to, commenting on, referencing. So that's just being, posting, being visible, telling your story from a social standpoint is ways in which we gain. And then just going back to like what we look for when we're actually at the pitch, right? And you've have that pitch ready to go. I would say one is kind of leading with your story. So what is the why? What makes this product different? Why did you even start the brand? And or what is, maybe not you specifically, but even like, if you're representing somebody else, why is the brand, coming to fruition? So something that supports and surrounds that because it makes you a differentiator, right? That's part of your differentiation as a brand. Um, and then I would say like any data points. So social media, maybe it's like referencing how many followers you have, what, engagement looks like, maybe some customer feedback. If you have any sales, like what does that look like? To give some sort of credibility in regards to the brand and performance that we would expect to see once it's in retail stores. Um, and then I would say, especially when it comes to GNC, if there's anything that's like clinically studied, you want to make sure that you're calling that out. And then the assortment. So again, and I think, you referenced it, but, we don't want to see if you have 50 SKUs in your assortment, don't show 8 of your pages or all your full assortment, right? We want to be presented with the products that make the most sense to go into a GNC store. And that should be from that brand already doing their due diligence in understanding what the important products are that would make sense and drive performance in GNC stores. So it may just be three SKUs. Maybe it's your top SKUs or SKUs that you've identified are white space opportunities in GNC. So you want to really be strategic in the assortment that you're presenting to us. And then just making sure within that, like we love I'm sure you've talked about it, but exclusives and first to markets are, critical, especially now that people have so many opportunities and places to shop. So is there opportunity, for a flavor in your assortment to be, at GNC for 6 months or a year, or, do you want to launch your entire brand only at GNC? So things like that are important if you can factor some sort of like differentiator there. And then lastly, I would just say a piece that a lot of emerging brands do tend to forget from that initial presentation is marketing. So, just as the assortment is specific to GNC, how is your marketing going to be, right? How are you should already have thoughts on how you're going to drive the traffic and engagement that you already have to GNC stores, right? So I have, a street team and I can go into 50 stores over the course of the first 30 days and sample out, or, I have a huge influencer base and I'm able to have those influencers go to GNC stores and tag GNC. So just thinking about those things, like how to make it unique and different, like specific to GNC or whatever retailer, you're going to present to.
So a couple of things before we kick it to Tracy, folks, that Roberta touched on that we cover often, the importance of having a story for your brand. Some of the other retailers we've interviewed have used the phrase I don't need any other cookie cutter brands or cut and paste brands. How are you different? And right there at the end, Roberta also hit on the really key point, and Tracy says this all the time. It's not about sell in, it's about sell through. So when she
Mhm.
talks about your marketing, how are you going to create the demand to keep your product turning on the shelf? So those are just a couple of really important points that you've heard over and over and over. And Roberta is a senior buyer. She just told you that herself. Tracy?
One more thing I wanted to ask about what we just talked about is, so how important is a brand? We just talked about sales. So do you put a lot of stock in, let's say, on data from Amazon or their direct to consumer website? Is that important? Is that a good data point for you if they're not in retail
Good
yet?
question.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think, anything that kind of gives a little bit of proof to concept just helps in us evaluating opportunities for store.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Well, probably a little bit more data than I sell out at my local farmer's market every Saturday.
correct. Yes.
Not that
Yeah, but
there's anything wrong with that, emerging brands.
not that there's anything wrong and I also want to say you don't have to have that in order to be able to present and be ready for retail either, right? Like if you have that, it's great to talk about, but we don't take a brand if they don't have any performance outside of their own website. There's still some opportunity there too.
Awesome. Well, let's talk a little bit about ingredients. So talk to our audience a little bit about, what information do you need or you're looking for from small emerging brands about their ingredients that the ingredients that they state are actually in there and that they actually do what they say they're going to do, because claims obviously are really important as well. So, and the labeling. So tell us a little bit about, what you're looking for there from a small emerging brands.
Yeah. I mean, I will say we definitely do our due diligence to make sure that the labels, ingredients are exactly, to FDA standards and to regulations to be safe for consumers. So, after the pitch, after we say we want to bring you guys in and you review the contract and everything is finalized there, we actually ask for flat label PDFs for every single item that we bring in our stores. And with those, we vet those through our science and legal team to make sure that they are up to standards and regulations. So a lot of times with emerging brands, it may be you send in your label and we ask some additional questions or ask for additional supportive documents to really help us make sure that your product, passes all regulations and rules in order to be on shelf and safe for consumers.
Do you
So
do you also ask about the source of the ingredients, like where do they come from? Do you get that detailed?
sometimes it depends on what the additional information, what that ingredient is that we may do a little bit deeper work into.
Mhm.
I will say the one thing that's great about emerging brands working with GNC is that, there's cases in which maybe you have an ingredient that's at a higher level than FDA standards, right? And we're communicating, hey, we really need it to be, you know, 20 milligrams versus 25 because based on the regulations XYZ, this is what the standard is.
Right.
And many times we're able to help you make sure that your product is, fit to not only come into our stores, but even as you grow and expand without any challenges there. So we do some pretty heavy work. Some people say it's like deeper than the FDA on on approval.
But that's good though. That's a good
Yeah,
thing. You
yeah,
take the ingredients and sourcing and claims very seriously, as well you should, which t speaks to just how important it is to you, that you're providing consumers quality products.
yeah. I mean, we're the leaders in this category, so we
Right.
need to make sure that every product that is on shelf, right, is the right product and makes sense and is safe for our consumers.
Well, and I also think it positions you guys as kind of a real, not only thought leader, but gatekeeper for the whole VMS space. Because without naming names, when you go into some of these more natural stores, I mean, I have seen products where I'm like, what in the world is that? And then, again, it might be totally fine or it could be voodoo in a bottle. But what you just
Yeah,
said about covering everything off, Tracy and I attended a show, a meeting earlier this week, and one of the speakers was talking about their outside testing and the data they provide back to their brand partners. So it's great to hear that from you.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's jazz up the crowd here a little bit, Roberta. How does an emerging brand, let's say you've already decided to give them a chance, how do they launch with you? Do you go online first and prove it out? Do you go all in, all stores? Do you do like a 30 store test? And, even though some people might be like, oh, Roberta, come on, let's go bigger. It's like, man, I'm protecting you. Go
Hmm.
small, prove it. Tracy always says small ball. It's easier to go small and expand than go huge and fail.
Yep.
That just leads to the trail of tears.
Yeah.
So tell us how you roll out a brand that you've decided to give a shot.
Yeah. I mean, I honestly would say it depends. It depends on a lot of factors, kind of some of the things that we just went over. Where are you from a current distribution standpoint? Is it a brand that is white space opportunity for us and we're trying to identify whether it's, going to be successful? Do you have a huge marketing, campaign that could help in really driving performance? So it all varies in that way, but the core of it is the fact that we have over 1,500 stores. However, we're able to segment into whatever, group of stores that we feel is most important from a launch perspective. So, it could be we start off in 80 stores to kind of test it out, like you said, Bruce, to understand, like, is this relevant? Can the supplier or vendor kind of handle what happens when you're in a retail store? Or it could be as big as, what, they have, you know, 25 million Instagram followers. They have, a huge database of influencers that they can drive into store, and it's more impactful if it's than all. And we know our consumers are really looking for these types of products. It may be a bigger group of stores. But the one thing I will say that's great with GNC and is not is pretty different from other retailers is we set our planograms every single month. So what that means
Wow.
is, yeah, so we can start off with 400 stores. And when we see success, as long as the vendor has the inventory to support it, we can actually move pretty quickly on expansion. So, we can take those moments and say, let's test it out. This is a new brand. We want to make sure that they're ready for retail when it comes to manufacturing and delivery and all of those things. And then once we see success, okay, let's start to roll that out, whether it's going from 400 to all or 400 to 600 to 800 or whatever that looks like.
So another step deeper here, Roberta, is Tracy and I always talk to the folks about, listen, ask the retailers specific questions. A lot of times they'll offer, but these are not secrets because they're like, God, Bruce, isn't that rude? No, it's called business.
Mm-hmm.
So talk about, do you share once you give the Bruce and Tracy brand a shot, and we're going to go roll out in, 300 stores. Do you talk at that time, hey, these are the hurdle rates, the sales velocity. So folks, that's pieces per store per week, or however Roberta chooses to measure, time to achieve those hurdle rates. Do you talk about scorecards like, hey man, you guys can't be cutting orders every other order. This isn't going to end well for
Mm-hmm.
you. So
Mm-hmm.
talk a little bit about some of the metrics and expectations you lay out once you decide to give this brand a shot.
Yeah. I would say, initially, of course, we provide like a vendor book, right? That gives all of the guidelines and stuff behind that from just doing business with GNC. So I definitely encourage like emerging brands to make sure that they're reading that and understanding what that looks like. To your point with Bruce, like if you're not delivering, what does that look like from a cost implication standpoint? The fees associated. When it comes to actually selling in store, we do provide every vendor a retail sales plan that they are to work to achieve. So of course, if I say, Bruce and Tracy, like your sales expectation is $10,000 a week on your item, and I'm not expecting to have that 10,000 week two, right? But the goal is that you're consistently growing your sales so that you're leading to that number. And I'm seeing that consistent growth over time. So you are given a sales plan, you are given a turn goal. And if you're not, you need to ask the question, because I know that some, merchants, we have so much going on, maybe we forget that component, but it's, up to you to make sure that you understand what your sales plan is.
But the key there, folks, that Roberta just validated, it's not a secret. She wants you to win.
Of
Otherwise, she
course.
would not have put you in. So one last question here, Roberta. It's a bit of a two-parter. How long on a normal, if there is such a thing, on a normal
Mhm.
brand, how long does it usually take to start hitting your goal in your mind? Is it 3 months? Is it 2 months? And then kind of an unfair question, but what the hell? I'm going to ask it anyway. With all of your experience, how long does it really take for your spider sense to go, this is a winner, or,
Yeah.
oh boy, we got problems?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so I hate to say this again, but it does vary on the product and category in regards to the time. So, say, for example, for me, one of my categories is food and drink. And with that is, majority single serve. So people are coming in, they're getting their protein bar, they're realizing whether it's something they like, they add to their regimen and come back, or they don't. So for something like that, for my category of food and drink, I should understand and see success in the first couple of months. So are people coming in? Are they liking their one bar? And then are they coming back to buy, right? So I'm going to know pretty quickly whether that's going to be successful. When it comes to more like supplements that have 30-day supplies, 60-day supplies, it's a little bit longer in understanding consumer purchase as well as repeat. So for things like that, for me, it's more of like a 6-month block on average that I would look at to understand whether it's going to be something that's successful or not. But again, making sure that you're seeing those sales lifts, right? 6 months is enough time to see what sales are on a regular standpoint versus those promotional periods, after the big launch, like what that looks like. So it gives enough of a guide to understand what typical performance looks like in the product.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So, Roberta, talk to us about what kind of marketing programs you like us to see when a small emerging brand comes to you to present. What are some of your hot buttons that says, okay, this brand gets it and they know how to drive, consumer awareness and trial?
Yeah. I mean, as we all know, like influencers are big, right? That's a big tool to help drive a big array of consumers and drive them into store. Um, but here too, it depends. Like maybe your product is derived from the medical community, and you're able to tap into that community and drive awareness through that. Maybe it's your email database. It's the founder being able to really talk about and present the brand and drive to traffic to stores. A lot of people are doing commercials right now. So whether that's on streaming platforms, which are a little bit less costly than, of course, national TV, podcasts are big. A lot of people do ads on podcasts, and that helps to drive. I think the overall is really just about really understanding where your consumer is, how to attract them, and then being able to tell them, hey, this brand is at GNC stores. So having a plan and utilizing what you already know is, places in which you can get consumers to come to store is important.
And then what kind of programs do you offer small emerging brands to get the word out?
Yeah. So we have a kind of a newer program called the Retail Media Network. And it's just kind of a mix of high impact, like awareness tactics that really help generate sales and traffic for your brand to GNC. So we're utilizing like Instagram sponsored ads, banners, email, like all of the modes in which you drive awareness. Except the great thing is that we're actually targeting consumers that are most likely to shop GNC. And so with that, and it's good for emerging brands because one, some of them don't really have like a strong marketing plan in place. They're still trying to identify like what the right mode is. And we actually have like tiered packages, you could say, in which you can buy into. So maybe, you're a really small brand and you don't have a lot of spend. Maybe you start with one of a smaller package just to try to understand like which mode really works and identifies to your brand that connects to our consumer. And then you can just kind of build out from there.
Great.
Excellent. Excellent. So, Roberta, you already answered a bit about like what does success look like? You talked about the different time frames that you're looking, but let's talk a little bit. If a brand is struggling to meet hurdle, and again, you've been doing this for a while, so your spider sense and intuition is probably highly honed. How do you notify the brand, and like what kind of counsel would you give them? Is it like, hey, Bruce, Tracy, we're building kind of slow.
Yeah.
What's the Roberta, hopefully light touch at first of like, guys, we need to get it going.
Yeah. So one, I would say, I like to, with emerging brands, have like consistent touch bases. Maybe it's like once a month to really talk about performance and where you are. But I will say, a note to emerging brands, like not all buyers are like that. So you have to be proactive in asking for those touch points to make sure that you're on track from a sales perspective. But when I'm having those conversations, like, hey, this is where you're trending at, which you should also know. You should be making sure, we've given you your sales plan at the beginning. So you should be utilizing the proper channels to understand where you're coming in and adjusting as you're going. It shouldn't be a surprise if we have a call and I'm saying, Bruce and Tracy, your sales aren't to plan, right? You should already kind of know that and have some sort of strategy around how to change that. But through our conversations, I'm like, okay, your sales are not where they need to be. These are some things that we've seen that can help, right? Maybe you need to sign up for more promotions. Maybe we need to look at your retail to see, is it in line with competition on shelf? Does it need to be adjusted? What are some modes that, Bruce, I know you're in, Target. What are some things that you've done there that help generate that maybe we can utilize in our space here? So just having, proper dialogue and open conversation around, modes that we can quickly institute to help generate and get those sales to the plans that we expect.
So folks, to recap a couple of important points Roberta just made, when she takes in an emerging brand, she sets up a monthly, ballpark touch base to make sure things are off to a good start so that you guys get some dialogue. As she cautioned, not all buyers will do that, but it does not hurt to ask because it's always easier to correct something. It's easier to put out a fire if you smell the smoke early.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, Roberta, you might have discussions the other way that if a brand might be really overperforming, it's like, hey, how do we keep this super positive momentum?
Yeah.
So one other thing before I push it back to Tracy, when you're monitoring these emerging brands, and let's say you're a buyer that's not offered a monthly touch base,
Mhm.
how long would a buyer usually wait before they go, aside from a supply problem? Hey man, we need to talk. Is it like 60 days? Is it 90? Is it really only 1 month? What's kind of the marinating period before a buyer goes, there's trouble in River City. We need to
Yeah.
talk.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like
It
I said it
varies.
many times, but it does. I mean, I would say from a new brand's perspective, for GNC, it probably is around the 6 month time, 3 to 6 months that we're evaluating. I mean, if we're not seeing it perform at all in those first couple of months, we're saying something, right?
Mhm.
Or shall I say, I would be saying something. Again, some buyers do not. So there may be instances in which you don't, if you're not communicating to them and they're not communicating to you, they may come to a point where we do kind of line reviews to understand what, future assortment looks like, that you get discontinued. And you may not even have had that conversation because you haven't reached out. They haven't felt it's important to reach out because you're not performing, right? So again, just making sure that you're proactive and reaching out. But yeah, I would say around that time is really where we're like, okay, you know what, it's not really moving the needle. It's not bringing that new consumer, that incremental sales into our space. And we need to talk about what kind of exit looks like.
Great.
Great.
That's
Thank you.
fantastic. And one thing I just want to emphasize to our small emerging brand audience that Roberta mentioned is communication is key, but you don't want to be needy. So
Correct.
don't send emails every day, every week. Don't be calling Roberta, hey, how am I doing? Everything okay? But so communication is really important. But
Yeah.
again, on the flip side, don't be that needy brand where you're calling or emailing every day. That's a
Yeah. And don't wait. Don't wait until, we say you're not performing and we're looking at exit,
Mhm.
right? To really change things around because, in all honesty, I haven't seen that where, you go 6 months, you're not performing. I say, hey, you know, we've been looking at performance. You're not meeting sales plan. You're not,
Mhm.
driving the performance that we're looking for. And they say, can you give us 30 days to implement a Facebook ad? Like it's too late, right? You
Right.
need to have that already, in the hopper going, understanding what your sales are. If you're not meeting them, what are the things that you can quickly activate and turn, and that you're constantly doing that versus like waiting to the end and then being surprised if you don't make it on shelf for the future.
I think the word you used was very appropriate, which is be proactive.
Hmm.
Because if you're reactive, it's probably in trouble. And I will say this, I think Bruce, you and I did a great episode a while back on when you get the call. So you don't want to be in that camp when you get the call and you're surprised. So
Yeah.
just to
Yeah.
plug for that. So Roberta, let's talk about sales representation a little bit. What's your thought on a brand that may want to work with you and just go it on their own? A brand founder that says, "Oh, I can do this," which we see a lot. Or
Hmm.
would you recommend a brand really working with a broker or a sales agency that really knows GNC? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, primarily we're working direct with vendors. But I will say if you don't feel like you have kind of the bandwidth and or the knowledge to really make sure that you're doing all the proper things when it comes to starting up with the paperwork, the manufacturing to delivering on time through transportation, that a broker is a good you know, partner in that because they have worked with other brands in the space. Most cases they've already worked with that specific retailer and they're able to move a lot quicker and making sure that those, tasks are kind of checked off in, 100% compliance way. But it just really is like, can you handle it and understand and know all of the time that it takes in order to not only get set up, but be able to have conversations on performance, making sure that you're, being, well, that's the one thing I do want to bring up is making sure that when a merchant does email you, that you're responding back to them in a
Yeah,
timely manner, right?
kind of
So if
important.
you're able to do all those things and you have the bandwidth, then execute on your own. But if you do know that you need help in that, even if it's just at the beginning to just really get set up and get going, it's a great partner to have in that experience.
Just curious, how many brands actually fail because they can't fill out the paperwork?
Uh, Not many fail, I would say, by not filling out the paperwork. I would say that um, some of it is the time that it takes is
Right.
sometimes a challenge in the beginning, right? You need to make sure, especially when you're new and we're still trying to figure out if you're right for our stores, if you're not responding quickly and or getting the information that we're requested in a timely manner, it starts to have us question whether it's the right brand for us or not.
Right.
Yeah, when doubt starts getting into your mind, that is not great.
Right.
So Roberta, what are some of the key actions that the brands that seem to make it with you? Is there anything that is fairly present in those brands that make it, or if that's too broad, what's the one or two really great winning moves an emerging brand made early to become successful with your operation?
Yeah. I would probably say, one of the biggest is, and it's so important. I know we've mentioned it a couple of times, but marketing. So again, your product, although we have, of course, our own consumer base, of course, a goal that, retailers have in getting their product on the shelf is that opportunity for more discoverability and more consumer base. But for us as a retailer, it's how are you going to drive traffic and sales into stores from the onset? So what we've seen from successful brands is that they have a strong plan in regards to how they're going to do that. And that starts from day one of product being on shelf. And not only that, but it's consistent too. So it's not, I'm going to have a 30-day marketing plan that's going to really drive traffic into stores. And then I'm going to just, you know, kind of sit by the wayside and let GNC do the work, right? It's consistently showing up and utilizing, your community in order to really impact and drive performance.
Excellent. So again, folks, comes back to what Tracy and I talk about. You got to turn. It's sell through, sell through, sell through, sell through. Tracy?
Yeah. So Bruce kind of asked the question about, what do winning brands do? So what have you seen brands do that the reasons they fail and they perform? What mistakes are brands making that you see that you're like, oh, don't do that?
Yeah. I mean, of course, not delivering on time, right?
Yeah.
So, maybe we don't even really understand what your performance is going to be because you're never delivering on time and we're always out of stock in stores. Another component I would say is that they're not doing any marketing, right? They are expecting for sales to come from consumers that already shop our store. And like we talked about, the goal of an emerging brand is to drive incremental. So, one thing that I've seen, if it's a brand comes on shelf and then we don't hear from them, they're not doing any marketing to drive awareness to GNC. Maybe they're not answering emails. So when we're saying, hey, we got this promotion coming up, like, can you participate? And then you miss the deadline. You know what I mean? Those are all some major components that I think lead to brands not winning. And then I would just say, there's times that maybe we, together say, this makes the most sense for our consumers, and we bring it in and it doesn't work. Just making sure that, we're having that conversation. Like, can we, hey, I see that this SKU isn't working well. Can we connect on this? Maybe it's not the right SKU. And then maybe instead of this, we should be putting in this SKU because over the course of the last couple of months, this has been now our key item. So, making sure that you're looking at that and having the conversations, and Tracy, to your point, like asking the questions and making sure that we're having that communication.
So one of Bruce and I's bumper stickers, we call it, is the worst thing that a buyer two things the buyer hates: a brand that doesn't sell and a brand that doesn't ship.
Mm-hmm.
Right, Bruce?
Okay.
Yeah, and if you're not going to ship, let the retailer know in advance.
Yes.
Not the day of.
That's true too. Okay, Roberta, we're rounding third, heading for home. So who has had the greatest influence on your career, and what did this person do that now that you've been working for a while, you're like, man, I can't believe she bet on me when I didn't know anything, or that this guy saved my bacon when I really got too far out on the limb. So, and if you don't want to name names, that's fine. But what did the person do for you that's really stuck with you over time?
Yeah. I mean, I'd probably say, and I'm fine naming names. One of my directors of allocation when I was at Victoria's Secret, Melissa Evans, she really helped me, honestly, in the early stages of my career on kind of the baseline of any position, I would say, but it's definitely helped in my merchandising career and just how to analyze business, how to, make a winning presentation, how to talk to leadership, how to conduct myself in the proper way, how to always be ready, like that readiness component. And I've utilized that baseline to just continue to kind of build upon my career in that way. So I think it's just really important for you to have, especially in the early stages of your career, somebody that helps to create that base that then you can continue to kind of build upon and be successful at.
That's fantastic. And it's great that, you recall, because sometimes it's not something huge. It's like, hey, back when we were starting, Tracy and I were worked together way back, but it was like, you're the young guys, be the first one in the conference room.
Mm-hmm.
You've now sat in on 8 of these meetings. You know what the questions are going to be. Don't act surprised when they say, what's our share in Chicago?
Yes.
So to your point, that preparation's awesome. All right, Tracy, give her the fun one.
I get the fun one. So Roberta, share with our audience your favorite band, brand, or football team.
Yeah, I would probably, and I'm sure you probably have had people say this, but I would probably say Beyonce in regards to my favorite kind of artist. And why? Not just because, of course, I love her songs, but I think just The fact that she, had kind of a desire and goal from childhood that she really honed in and made sure that she was the best at. And even through like all the hurdles and stuff, like she wasn't an overnight success, right? She's been dropped by labels, like all of those factors. But I think it's just a good representation for anybody in regards to like just being consistent, just having a goal and sticking to it and knowing that like, at some point it's going to come to fruition, even though you have those, it's actually really great for emerging brands, but like, you know what I mean? Because you're going to have those ups and downs. You're going to have those instances in which, maybe you get kicked out of a retailer, but, continuing with the mission and the goal of what you want to do can always lead, ultimately to success.
It's amazing. Tracy and I, we made one attempt to get a band on as an emerging brand because it's kind of like what would be harder than trying to break into music. And so far I've been unsuccessful. But to your point about Beyonce, I mean the word I come back when I look at people like her, it's just tenacity.
Yeah.
Something, not many people come out like Michael Jackson and when they're 5 are famous.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's trial and error, and then you might have an album that's a dud, and they're like, "Oh, she only had 3 songs in her," and then
Right.
boom, look at her now.
I
All
think
right,
too, like the fact,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, I think too, the fact that like even though she's at a level, so even though when you find success as a brand, like she is still um giving like 1,000% every single time. So I think that's equivalent to a brand as well. Like not only when you find success, like in order to maintain that success, you still need to continue at that high, level of performance to continue to be a competitor and continue to stand out is important.
Well, it's interesting you say that because I was thinking these 2 women, Beyonce and Taylor Swift, they could mail it in for the rest of their life and be fine, and neither of them do.
Mm-hmm.
Because they care. And I think that says a lot about all the creativity that's still in their head
Yep,
and the fact that they're not disrespectful to their fans. They're
I
like, hey
agree.
man, they expect it. I got to bring it.
Mm-hmm.
So Roberta, thank you so much for your time today. If anyone wanted to reach out and learn more about working with GNC, or if you were kind enough to take a few phone calls from our listeners, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I'd probably say LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on there. I do respond to messages, so I would definitely look me up and connect with me on LinkedIn.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Tracy, the big finish.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Roberta. You have been great, and I know our small emerging brand audience is gonna love that. We touched on a lot of good things, and you gave a lot of great, wise, sage advice to our audience. So we thank you very much, and audience, please look for this broadcast very soon, and continue to follow us on LinkedIn, also Spotify and Apple, as well as our new website, www.road2retail.com. Thank you very much.
Good
Thank
luck
you.
out there, folks.